I believe that Americans in general are removed from that. However, Americans are very aware that something is wrong. And what I mean by that is they not only feel it in their pocketbooks from the gas prices and the economic impact, but they also feel it when they go home and their sisters and brothers aren't coming back for a while, just like we saw in Iraq, Afghanistan, and those buildups. Now that we see that the country is kind of shifting to more European affairs, it looks very familiar. Think Cold War, think World War II. These are things that are very familiar. Many Americans of adult age have read about these incidents in world history, so they are familiar with this sentiment, but aren't necessarily keen on the ideas and what led up to it. Americans should care about this topic in particular because not just because of the economic impact with our gas prices, but also when we think about the mobile devices that we use on a day-to-day basis, a lot of those products are not just sourced from China, they're sourced from Ukraine, and also certain products such as wheat and things of that nature. It impacts our overall global supply chain and what we actually see in our refrigerators on a day-to-day basis, what we're feeding our kids. So it's bigger than just the oil prices, but also when, if anyone who's familiar with the State of the Union address from President Biden, well, there's a huge military buildup. That money comes directly out of the taxpayers' dollars. That money doesn't just kind of come out of nowhere. This is money that we put into our taxes April 15th of every year. So that money is going to be missed, and it's going to come from somewhere, and it's going to come from our pockets. So it is a reason to be tuned into that.
So what do all these things mean geopolitically and commercially?
So geopolitically, it means a couple of things beyond just the economic piece, but it means that there are new powers that are rising. It means that the institutions that we built after World War II, think the IMF, we think about NATO, we think about the United Nations, all these institutions that were created to manage global affairs, the premise of them are being questioned at this very moment. Think about geography. Russia shares a border with China. China is the second largest economic force on the planet. The U.S. is by far the most powerful militarily. However, when you have a second in command that's demanding power or demanding some type of balance in a global structure, and then you have the third in command that's right at their borders, Russia, willing to take aggressive action against, potentially, maybe not NATO countries, that is a message to not just the West, but to the world that this current structure that we have right now is just not gonna suffice. What does it mean commercially? It means that the global supply chain is going to be heavily impacted because most countries are going to build up their defenses because the top three nations on the hegemonic states on the globe are the heavily armed nuclear powers right now. So when they're in conflict with each other, it's kind of whatever you make it at that point. So it means that we have to be very calculated. Citizens really do have to get politically engaged to make sure that there are checks and balances in place. That means that the person who we're going to vote for to send to Congress, they need to be willing to check the party that's in power, regardless if it's their party or not. We have to remember that the leaders of these nations, they have the power to actually go to war, but Congress has a responsibility and duty to check them. I believe that civil society should actually have an interest in who is running and making policy for us, which means vote. When we think about the education system, civics is not a main topic. Back in the early 90s, it wasn't. It was one of the programs that constantly was debated of whether the government should fund it or not in public schools. And for me and my background growing up and going to private school, we had civics lessons in the early pre-K through, not pre-K, but I say as early as third and fourth grade, going all the way up into high school. But then the public schools do not have those type of teachings. So I think that one of the most important things is our elected officials should be seriously considering putting civics back into our schools because civic society, the uprisings, a lot of these things can be averted if the public actually felt like they had a say in it. But beyond that, in terms of what our public and our elected officials should be debating, three very important things that has to come into debate. America's role in the world, that in our military power, what kind of resources we need to be putting into our defenses. Also, our cybersecurity. What kind of resources are we going to be putting into how we regulate artificial intelligence, how we regulate tech companies, who owns the data that they actually pull from us. There is a Innovation Act, if you will, that's coming out of Congress. President Biden did talk about that, but it was prescripted under President Obama, and it's been debated a couple of times, but hasn't made it out of the House and over into the Senate for any kind of serious debate from our elected officials. But then when we look at the actual bill itself and just the proposals, it doesn't address this very, very serious problems that we have. Like, we have these things called deep fakes. Well, guess what? No one regulates that technology, and anyone can make it. Any kid sitting in the basement can print off a 3D gun and use it to do whatever they want to do. And we haven't even touched that. The bill doesn't even touch that. It's more about bringing broadband access to local communities. Well, guess what? That same broadband access that these local communities don't have, for all the money that can go into that type of systems, right now it's publicly funded. Not publicly, but privately funded. Private corporations, they have the control over who neighborhood gets it and who neighborhood does not get it. So debating the way our budget is already set up. And then finally, I would say the most important thing is debating the NHI, National Health Institute, the funding that they get and the monies, the way they distribute that money, because it is, quite frankly, the reason why our healthcare is so expensive. Our federal government uses the tax dollars, put out grants, and it's always the usual suspects. It's a big pharmaceutical company. Well, how can a small pharmaceutical company or someone coming out of a new tech school that has a great idea, has an innovative idea, how can they get started if the only chance they get is to go to the usual suspects? So these are things that I think we really have to have serious, very serious debates about.